OODAcast, informing your decisions with intelligence, analysis, and insight. Brought to you by the team at OODAloop.com.
Hello, I'm Bob Gorley, the Chief Technology Officer with OODA LLC. Today on the OODAcast, Dr. Tony Tether. Dr. Tether was the director of the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency, DARPA, from 2001 until his retirement in 2009. I think we all know DARPA. DARPA is one of the most famous agencies in the world. DARPA is the agency in the Department of Defense that focuses on research, development, and demonstration of concepts, devices, and systems in order to provide highly advanced new technology capabilities. As a director of DARPA, Dr. Tether was responsible for management and leadership of the agency and its projects. He focused on the high payoff, innovative research and development that the nation needed during this time. Now, currently, Dr. Tether serves as the CEO of the Sequoia Group and sits on several advisory and corporate boards. Dr. Tether, welcome to the OODAcast.
Hi, well, thank you very much. It's actually a pleasure to be here.
Well, it's been great talking with you prior to this and reading over your bio. And one thing that just jumps out at me is you've had a very long and distinguished career that started with a degree from RPI, Rensselaer Polytechnic. And I wanted to ask if you could give us a bit of your foundational story from that point on.
Well, well, first of all, actually, when I first went to school, I went to a two-year junior college, what we call a junior college. And that was a two-year school in my hometown, Middletown, New York. And then I eventually transitioned to RPI for the last 2 years. When I graduated from RPI, it was in the middle of the year. And so I had looked around and I found a job with Bell Labs. Now, Bell Labs was interesting to me because summer times I had worked for New York Tel, both my junior and senior year. So I was familiar with that company. And I thought this would be a great place to go work, especially since they promised me I could go to school anywhere I wanted to get a master's degree. So I got married and I went down to Bell Labs at the beginning of February. And they had a great incoming program. They took you around and showed you things, and it's just a really excellent place. It's too bad that we let that go away. But Bell Labs was really a premier organization and needed for this country. Anyways, I went down and I'm going around the tour, and I had to meet this fellow who they said I could go to school. Bell said I could go to school anywhere I wanted to for a master's degree. So I met with him, and he said, "Well, we're here to pick your school." And I said, "Oh, I know where I want to go. I want to go to Stanford." And he said, "Well, you can go anywhere you want, but these are the 6 schools." And they were all good schools, MIT, and they were all East Coast schools. I said, "Well, wait a minute. They told me I could go anywhere I wanted to go." And he says, "Well, you can go anywhere you want to go as long as it's one of these 6 schools." So we had this argument going on, and he said, "Look, here's what I need to have you do. I'm going to see you next week, and we're going to talk about this. And you need to pick the school." So I lived in Middletown, New York. Bell was in New Jersey. I drove home thinking, "Oh my goodness!" And when I got home, there was a telegram. Remember, this was back in the days. I think long distance dialing was really just coming in. And I had a telegram from Stanford offering me a 3-year scholarship to go to Stanford to get a PhD. And they were going to not only pay all the tuition, they were going to give me a stipend of $500 a quarter or something like that. So I go back down to Bell and I meet with the guy finally in the second week. And I said to him, "Listen, we've got it made. Look at this telegram I got. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to stay here until September, and then I'll go to Stanford." And he says to me, "Well, here's what you're going to do. You're going to either pick one of these 6 schools today, or you're going to leave today." I said, "Oh." So I left. So on the books, I was a Bell Labs employee for 2 weeks. I go home, I'm married, no job, and I look in the paper to see what kind of jobs there are, and there was a job to become a fuller brush man. Now, most of the people listening to this, they may have remembered the movie or heard of the movie, The Fuller Brush Man. Red Skelton was the one who played that. But they probably don't remember people coming door to door. People don't come door to door anymore. And that's all taken care of by our computers now. So I signed up and I became a fuller brush man.
Door-to-door salesman, you go around and
door-to-door salesman. And the thing that you had to do was, when you were knocking on a door, in fact, they taught you quite well. They said, look, you really want to be looking around, and when you go in, first of all, they gave you a way to get in. One was, you knock on the door, a person would come to the door, and you said, look, I've got these things I can give you, a brush, blah, blah, blah. And I get credit for them, even if you don't buy anything. And so that usually worked, and people would let you get in the door because they were in your bag and you had to open it up. And you would walk in sideways, no kidding, looking away from them, because the fuller people had found people will tend to not slam a door on you if you're not looking at the door. Okay. So you get in the house and you're opening up your case and you're going, all these things were at the bottom of your case. And they taught you to look around the room and see if you can relate to anything, and tell people, so you can say, hey, this product will help you in that problem over there, and sort of relate to them on that. And they had you practice that, and it really worked. I had the person who ran that area would come around with you. And one time he came with me, and it was it was cold, remember? And we were selling cream that thing that you would put on your hands and keep your. So we go into this house, and I would say that I got these people, I'm training them. He was actually the general manager, and so and I went through the spiel, came out, sold the can. And he said to me, he says, now wait a minute, that was really great, but next time when we go, I want you to tell the person at the end, would you like a 6-pack? I said, a 6-pack? A 6-pack will last them for years. Nobody's gonna buy a 6-pack. And I'm arguing with him, and he finally said, do it, just do it. So we go to the next house, and I go through the spiel, and I come to the end, and I said, and would you like a 6-pack? And this person said, yeah. So I sold a 6-pack. Now that was like $20 of a sale, and I got 40% of that. Now this is $8 in the early 60s, I mean, yeah. So it was wow. So I come out, and he said, now wait a minute, it'll never happen again. Never happen again. But what you're doing is that when you say this to somebody, if they really want to buy the product, they will tend not to go buy just one. They will probably buy 2. And so this is the way you get them to buy 2 things. So it was a great learning experience. It was, it was really looking at and what became sort of the rest of my life. Like when you talk to somebody, you said what problem they had, and what is the problem, and then what you have to solve that problem. One woman, I had a big catalog, and there was a dust mop which was about the size of a bowling alley dust mop. And I was trying to sell it because it always gave me something to do, to try to sell something that was crazy in the catalog. And I walked into this house, I got in this house, and she had a hallway, which was probably 20 feet long and about the width of a bowling alley. So I said to her, I said, you got this big here, and now if you go and try to dust this with a regular dust mop, you're going to have to go back and forth and take you a lot of time. She said, yeah, I do. I have that. It does. I said, I've got a dust mop here that with one sweep, you can kind of what the problem is, and this is how you're going to solve it. And she said, that's right, I'll take one. And I said, one. I said, well, wait a minute. You might be in a situation where you take the one and it's dirty and you still want to do it again. So if you buy 2 of these things, I'll throw in a little bag. She bought 2 of them. So I always listen, the fuller brush. Now I worked, and then I finally went to Stanford, in the fall. But that job really, I have to admit that in my life from that point on, I constantly would sometimes think about what would I do if I was a fuller brush man again, and with this on. And now it was bigger things, and so that really impressed me. It also really, I think, it really not only impressed me, but it really was something that I learned that really helped me in later years in ways that it's hard for me to explain.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And I have a feeling we'll hear themes of this come out as we continue to discuss it. I wanted to say that we in the technology domain, frequently people think of us as introverts, and we have a tendency to be that way and not want to communicate. And it seems like at an early age, you had this experience where you had to communicate and you had to listen for problems and understand what you're trying to solve in order to close a deal.
That's right. Not only had I listened to problems, but if I had to look around and see if I could point out a problem that sometimes people didn't realize they had. Okay, like she never thought of this big hallway as a problem until I said, "Boy, if you want to do this, you're going up and back and forth." And she said, "Yeah, you're right." And so that was the problem. And I said, "I got the solution right here." And it was, but it was, it's not that approach followed me for the rest of my life, even to today. I think that way. And of course, at DARPA, as you said, that's what we do. We basically first ask the question, what is the problem you're trying to solve? Okay. But the more important question after that is, what difference will it make if you solve it? And if you've got to have if you have the answers to those two questions, you'll be able, and now you'll get the money to develop what needs to be developed in order to do it. But we'll go on here and talk a little bit more.
All right. So then you did end up going to Stanford. You
Yes.
got your master's and a PhD.
And a PhD.
Now, clearly you were driven to Stanford for some reason. What had made you set your sights on Stanford as the place you wanted to go to?
Jimmy Dean. Jimmy Dean. I don't know if you remember the actor Jimmy Dean. You're too young. Yeah. Well, Jimmy Dean. I was a great Jimmy Dean fan. You remember he got killed in a car, and Jimmy Dean was in California, so I was going to California. It was California, and Stanford just happened to be there.
Okay, great. That's fair. Now, then you did end up coming back to the East Coast, and you worked in the Department of Defense. You were actually in the department from the late 70s to the mid 80s.
Yes, I was. When I came back, well, the company that when I graduated from Stanford, there was 4 or 5 of us that started the company. We were all control theory people. Okay, control theory people that are ones that you look at a problem, you figure out how to solve the problem. And this is using remember, computers were just becoming available. I mean, it's hard for people to understand this, but computers were really just becoming available. So before, people, when they solved the problem, they had to sort of say, this is the problem and here's the response. And maybe that problem really didn't show up the way they thought it would. But if you had a computer that was doing this, it could be sensing what was going on. And whatever the problem was that showed up, you can then pick an appropriate response to it. And that was real-time resource and control. That we were all that way. So we started a company to do that. And in fact, the company was very successful. The issue in the States was, remember the New York blackout, which spun across the country. You probably don't remember this, but it knocked out all the stuff across the country. All the people went down, power went down. The reason is that when New York went down, it just cascaded because there was no way for anybody to understand that there was a problem and stop it from happening. It went by them so fast because they didn't have any computers doing it. It was people who were going to throw switches. And so we showed that we could have stopped that, and we did quite well in doing that. And of course, we had 2 parts of the company, one that did more domestic problems and one did military problems. In the military, at that time, they would come up with a threat. They would make up a threat, a scenario, and then they would develop their whole system based upon that scenario and maybe some modifications to it. Well, if the scenario didn't show up, everything they built was going to be like the New York blackout, And so we showed that we could actually create a system which, when the threat came in, the system could figure out this is the threat that is there right now, and then respond to that threat, so that we were no longer vulnerable if the threat wasn't exactly what we thought was going to come in. And we were quite successful with that. Sold a company to British Petroleum, and I took off and had the opportunity to go into the government to find out what was really. I was always curious. I was on the outside. I was wondering what really goes on inside there. So I was able to go in, and I became at that time the director of national intelligence for Harold Brown, who was the secretary of defense.
Okay.
And stayed there until the end of the Carter administration. And then when Reagan won, I had an opportunity to, and had to leave that job I had an opportunity to go to DARPA the first time, and I became the director of the Strategic Technology Office for 4 years, and that gave me my experience at DARPA. Then I finally left the government and went out into industry.
Okay, and industry, that's when you went to Ford Motor Company.
That's when I went to Ford Motor Company.
Now, how did that happen?
Well, Ford Motor Company really came after me to go to Detroit. And I kept saying, I am not going to go live in Detroit. No way am I going to go live in Detroit. So stop, and they would come back and they would up the ante, and I would say, no, I'm not going. Finally, I got to the point where the ante was, over twice the salary I was currently making, and they had promises of all kinds of, and they would give me a car, and all this stuff. So I finally said, my God, I'm going to Detroit, and I went. So my first couple of days I was there, the headhunter guy in the apartment, when he says, Henry wants to see you. Henry Ford wants to see you. So I said, oh, okay. So we get in the car, we're driving over to Henry's. And he says to me, he says, Henry was really taken that you won the Bendix Award. Now, the Bendix Award is a big award, more like in the automotive part. And we won the Bendix Award was, so it was very prestigious. And so, here Henry's saying, look at this guy. He won the Bendix Award, and yet he's in the government. He's the guy, go get him. I'm sure that's what happened. That's why they kept that coming up. So I said to the guy, the fellow, I said, well, it is true that a Tether did win the Bendix Award. However, that Tether was Carol Tether, not Tony Tether. Carol Tether is my wife. When I started the company, she was our programmer, okay? And actually the programmer was the most important person in the company, because the rest of us dealt with these equations, but the problem was, you had to put them in a computer, and the computer was going to be sensing things, and it was going to be doing this in real time. And she was the solution to the problem, okay? And computers were just becoming really available. I know it's hard for people to believe this. We actually put an office in a computer where there was a computer center. So we would run decks of card downs and run and see if the stuff worked. I mean, it was ancient times, it's hard for people to believe. So we had a contract for how do we reduce the emissions from an automobile. One way to do that is to actually see how the engine is performing and cut back the gasoline, or do something, in order to minimize the emissions. And they developed a real-time technique to have that done in time. Big deal. Henry was really right to say, hey, this is a big deal. He just had the wrong person. Okay. Anyways, the headhunter guy said to me, says, let's not bring that up. And at that moment, I knew why I was there. I knew why I was sought after so much. And obviously I met Henry. He never brought it up. I never brought it up. He also never called me by my first name. He called me Tether. And I thought, well, maybe he really does know it's a Carol Tether or not a Tony Tether. And he just doesn't want to have to admit that,
Yeah. Yeah. Seems like you owe your wife a thanks for that one.
Yeah, I have. And she never lets me forget it, by the way. I should never have told her.
Tony, after Ford, then you went back to industry a bit closer to Department of Defense, and then would eventually rejoin DARPA as the director in 2001.
Yeah, I did. I actually, again, I was sought after. I really didn't want to go back in the government, but the people who were doing the headhunting for the people in the government, they convinced me to at least come in and talk to the people. Okay. And I did. The first person I met was going to be the Secretary of the Navy. And he wanted me to come in and be his guy between him and the Congress and all of that, And I said, well, I'm not your person. So listen, I know I got everything you want, except I don't know the Congress. And you really can't afford to have somebody in here who doesn't know the Congress. In fact, if you knew somebody who knew the Congress but was not technical, he's still the right person for you, because it's all Congress. And he fought with me. And as I was leaving, he said, well, you can't tell me that you can't be the director of DARPA. Well, this is a guy going for the Navy. I figured I didn't have any worry about it. I said, no, you're right. Director of DARPA, no question. I'm fully qualified for that. So then I went to saw the guy who was going to be the Secretary of the Air Force, gave him the same story. He agreed with me. You know, really, he didn't fuss with him. And then to the Army, and the Army guy fought a little bit. But I go back to the room, and then he said to me, what the hell what's going on here? I says, what do you mean? He says, we got Pete Aldridge coming to talk to you to be the director of DARPA. Pete Aldridge also I knew my first time around. So in fact, most of the people were kind of from the first time around, and we kind of all knew each other. So Pete comes in, and he was going to be the Undersecretary of Defense. Pete comes in and he says, hey, Tony, how you been? Blah, blah, blah. He says, listen, I got to go. You're the director of DARPA, and he leaves the room. That's it. I never was asked again. You know, I was never asked. I was just, I'm going to be the director of DARPA, and he leaves the room. So these other guys came in, and I told him what he said, and he said, well, he can't say that. And I said, well, he just did. And I thought, well, maybe I can get out of this anyways. Although I must admit, the director of DARPA was enticing to me. Long story short, eventually, before you knew it, I became the director of DARPA. And it was, you know, I had really a good business going. I mean, it wasn't like I was giving up a lot of money for $135K a year. Okay. You know, but you know what? I don't regret it one bit.
It seems like it's an opportunity to shape things that really, really matter.
Oh yeah, no, it's all of that. It's hard to even explain. I mean, at that time, you know, the DARPA budget was $2 billion a year. They actually, even as what some people are talking about today, they wanted to raise it. Rumsfeld, he wanted to make it $8 billion. I finally convinced him, hey, don't do that. You know, that's too much money. You'll change this place in ways that you don't understand. You know, we'll become a place where we're getting money out the door, and we've forgotten the basic two questions, like what is the problem we're trying to, and what difference would it make? Because we don't have time to worry that. We got to get this money out the door, you know? Yeah. And I always told my guys, I'm not going to fund a program just because we have the money to do it, you know? Right. The hell with it. We won't spend the money. And so eventually he agreed, and he cut it back down. And he and the fellow who was the bean counter in the Army and the government, they just said, anytime you get a program, don't worry about it. You come and tell us, we'll get the money for you. But I said, that's good. You know, we'll just keep that between us. And it was a great relationship, and it really worked. It really worked. I mean, the guys at DARPA understood that the only way they were going to get money out of me was to answer two fundamental questions. And there were actually more, but if you didn't answer these two, you weren't going to get anything. One was, what is the problem you're trying to solve? Okay. What difference will it make if you solve it? Okay. And depending on the answers to that, we would go through the other details, like what technology did you have to develop and all of that, and how much would it cost, and when could you do it, and who was the customer? You know, who was the customer was a big deal, because we had to transition that money, that product to somebody. And I always, since I understood the government, in the government there's organizations and the services, and there's a person called the 8. Okay. He's the guy who does the out years in the budget. There's a 5-year budget. In the first year is the budget year, and the rest are out years. He's the one that does the out year. So I would go to him to convince him that I would, with a story like this, I'll do the first 3 years, but you in the 4th or 5th year from now, in other words, way out in the future, you have to put money in to take it away from me, assuming that we meet these criteria that we're going to agree upon now. Okay. And it worked. And time marched on as it became the near year. It wasn't like we didn't have to fight in the battle of the near year, the current year. But I'll tell you what, it's a hell of a lot easier to fight a battle when you got the money already in there than to try to get the money in there. And so that's the way we ran it. And that allowed us to have great success rates in transitioning technology.
Right.
because we solved the problem in the very beginning. Okay.
Yeah.
You know, we knew what the problem was, and we solved it by going to the person who we could get into the out year where only he really was the guy you had to talk to.
Right. Well, Tony, you provided some slides I want to show and have
Sure.
you walk me through these slides. And for people listening to the audio version of this podcast, these slides will be posted on our website so you can get a look yourself. But let me bring these slides up and ask you to walk me through these.
Yeah. Now, the purpose of the slides is it's amazing how many people really don't know where DARPA came from.
Right.
It all started with Sputnik on October 4th, 1957. The Russians launched a satellite, which was the first time it ever happened. This satellite, by the way, was built by the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians were really the engineers of Russia. They're the ones that built the satellite and also built the booster that launched the satellite. Up until then, the United States was building an air defense system. Billions of dollars going into it, because we believed that the Russians were coming with aircraft, okay? That day, all of that went away. Because at that day, we knew that if somebody could make something that can go all the way around the world, they can make something that can go halfway around the world. And that was the end of the air defense. And we really, that was the start of you know, having missiles do this. Next slide.
Okay. President
Eisenhower, who was president at the time, actually a great guy, very intuitive. He asked, how did the U.S. get beat going to space? How did we get beat by a third world country? You know, how come the U.S., how could we get beat going into space, not being the ones that are second into space? Next slide. We had space programs, by the way. It wasn't like we didn't have in all of the services somebody doing space. The Army was doing it, the Air Force was doing it, the Navy was doing it. But there's this thing, Eisenhower really discovered what today, it wasn't called this at that time, he discovered the valley of death, okay? In the near term, we have people doing science and technology programs for the armed services. The armed services are doing them, okay? They're working on current problems, okay? Then we have these people who are really out here on the far side. They got fundamental research, they got crazy ideas, they got new inventions. The problem is that they can't get over to the near side. There's this big gap here that takes money to take these ideas and get them to the point where the near side becomes believable that, hey, we can actually produce this and get it out in the field in maybe 3-4 years, okay? So they're stuck. And this today is called the Valley of Death. Next slide. He created DARPA. He created DARPA to mitigate the Valley of Death. And I want you to understand, this is what DARPA does. DARPA is the organization that basically looks at these people on the far side, finds out what they're doing, asks the fundamental questions. What problem are you trying to solve? And if you can solve it, what difference will it make? And these people on that side typically didn't answer those questions. They didn't think of them, but they got pretty good at answering it. If DARPA felt that what difference it would make is a big enough deal, DARPA is the organization that would fund those people to take them across the Valley of Death into the people who are actually going to then spend the money to make it a real thing. That's what DARPA does, and that's what DARPA does extremely well. Extremely well. And all the things that you hear coming out of DARPA all usually reside from somebody who came in and said, hey, I've got this idea. And they now know that you might as well not come in if you can't answer at least the 2 fundamental questions. And it solves this problem. Yeah, okay. And if we can solve this problem, this will make a big difference and can articulate what that big difference is. And if we accept that, we fund them to get him to the point where he can demonstrate it enough to have people who are on the near side take it from us. And of course, like I said, my conversation of me with the 8 is because I was setting it up that for the 8 to do it. When we started it, I knew that we wouldn't be ready for it to be taken over for 3 or 4 years. So I would get the 8 to be putting money in his budget 4 or 5 years from now, and also agree with me what had to be done for him to take it. And that's how the whole system, and the system works that way today. It's still going on today, and it really wasn't something that I created. It was really created by a fellow in the 70s.
Well, and Tony, looking at this, I think all of us recognize that if this was not in place, we would not have things like the internet today. And there's so many other capabilities that DARPA has brought us. If DARPA was not doing this process that you just described right here, the deaths from COVID would have been just horrible, horrifying. Who knows how much larger they would have been without DARPA's investments in the biological sciences?
Well, again, yeah, and DARPA was doing it on the come. You know, they had there was a problem. There was a person that came by and says, "We got this problem, and I've got a solution," and blah blah blah. And so DARPA was funding that when COVID came along. It was too bad in one way, but fortunate that they were. But that's what they do. So next slide. This is the thing that created DARPA. Can you imagine this? 2 pages. And look at the date, February 7th. It was 4 months later. I mean, can you imagine today anything in the government? Now, this is Eisenhower pushing this, okay? Eisenhower understood this. He understood this. Now, how he understood it, I don't know, but he definitely understood it. And so he created DARPA, and this is the document that creates DARPA in the Department of Defense. And in fact, the director, as you can see, he had him reporting to the Secretary of Defense. Yeah, and also this person reporting to the Secretary of Defense is not subject to congressional confirmation. Deliberately, he did that. So this person was freewheeling. There was nobody that could get to him and harm him except the Secretary of Defense. You know. Yeah. Okay. And so he knew who his boss was, and the secretary was. So this was amazing to have this done. Now DARPA almost went away because people talked to Eisenhower and said, you know, it's really not good to have the whole space business. Remember, he was really answering from his viewpoint the Sputnik question. You know, so people said it's not really probably good to have the space program of the United States being done by the military. And he agreed. I know he agreed because he created NASA. I mean, you know, he created NASA to do the space program. NASA once again has got a creation like this. You know, guy's not subject. It's really not an agency, even though it's called an agency. It's a thing, I guess is the only way to put it. And it does report to the secretary, in fact, in this case, it actually reports to the president. Now, DARPA almost went away. Remember, the whole thing that was created for was Sputnik and to get us back into space and all that. It almost went away. Next slide. As luck would have it, we were trying to get a atmospheric test ban treaty, a nuclear bomb test ban treaty. The problem was nobody knew how to tell if somebody violated it. DARPA created a program called Project Vela. Vela is a satellite that a nuclear explosion has a very distinct signature, you know, electronic signature to it, and it's partially to do with the way that the bomb is created to go off. So we knew the signature. The question was, how would we know if somebody set it off in the atmosphere? From the signature, we would know if something happened, but we didn't know where it happened. Okay. DARPA created a program which had many satellites up. In fact, they're still up there, still working, where these satellites could take that signature and basically put them together and from figuring out what time, how long it took to get them, and they could find a point on the ground or the point in the air that bomb went off, and that allowed us to go along with the test ban treaty. It wouldn't have happened. DARPA did that, and that basically gave DARPA the shot in the arm, so that while it was, it went downhill when NASA took over space, and it came roaring back with DARPA solving a major national security problem. That again, somebody already on the far side knew all of this, and DARPA was the organization that got them to accelerate that into reality. Next question. Finally, George Heilmeier put all of this down on paper. And there's an interesting story. George Heilmeier was the DARPA director in the late 70s. When George came in, he had a computer department, and the guys in the computer department would come and give him this document and ask him to sign it. This is what George told me. So, and he would say, well, wait a minute, what is this about? Well, I said, just sign it, George. And so he was not going to do that. He said, well, wait a minute, where does this tell me what's this going to solve, and why I care? I said, George, just sign it. And he said, no. So he stopped signing them. And so finally time went on, and they weren't getting any more money to sign, that they came to George and said, okay, George, tell us what you want. Tell us what you want, and we'll do it, okay? So George sat down, and he wrote down these questions, okay? The first two are obvious. What is the problem you want to solve? Articulate your objectives with absolutely no jargon, okay? How's it done today? And what's the limits? What's new in your approach? And what do you think will be successful? Who cares? What difference will it make? Well, those 4 questions are really wrapped up into the 2 that I've talked about. George Heilmeier is the one who put it down, and then he made the agency execute those programs, and that's the only way they were going to get him to sign money. They hated him for it. Yeah. They hated him for it.
But these questions endure today. I see them every year.
They definitely have endured today. In fact, when I got there, and I was there twice, so I was there in the early 80s, and George had just really done this. So, I was one of the first people who embraced this, and when I was the Strategic Technology Office. And I basically, I guess we got a little time. Let me give you another story. I used to go out and go to where people were doing testing, where they were, and I would watch what was happening. We had soldiers against, and then other soldiers acting as enemy soldiers. And I would wander around and listen to what was going on. And I came back one day. This is when I was stoked. I said, well, you know what? I found that the real problem these guys have is that we know where the enemy is. We got all kinds of sensors that tell us where the enemy is. We don't know where the hell we are. Okay. Every time people are talking to each other, they're saying, well, where are you? Well, I'm by the big rock. What big rock? And they would get a map out and try to figure out where the hell the big rock was. And I said, we by the way, and GPS was just coming in, okay? Early 80s, okay? And there were just a few of those satellites, and there were a few GPS things around, but they were big things, and people had to wear a backpack. So one guy would wander around out there, and in his backpack, it would take him like 25 minutes to 30 minutes to get a fix. And then he would only know where he was, okay? So I went back and I told the guys, I said, any of you guys have any ideas of how to make this be smaller and faster? I'll fund it. So I had a guy who was really into gallium arsenide, which is a particular material. Okay? And he came to me and said, I can solve it. I said, okay, tell me how. He says, well, I'm going to use gallium arsenide, which has a noise figure, which is far less than that in silicon. The noise figure is the noise in the system. And if the noise is high, then the satellites have to be close to you to get a signal that you can detect. If you got low noise, you can see the same satellite further away, which meant that for the few satellites we have, you could see many satellites at once. So, that would solve the problem of the 25 minutes becoming pretty fast. So I said, well, how big can you make it? And he said, how big do you want to make it? And I said, well, I smoked at that time. I said, here, see this Marlboro pack? Put it into this Marlboro pack, everything. So he went away and he came back in about a week. And he says, well, I can't put it in the Marlboro pack. And being the peckerhead that I was, I said, well, that's it. And he said, no, wait a minute. Virginia Slims was another cigarette pack. That was, if you don't know, remember Virginia, but they were taller. Okay, they was taller. He needed that form factor, and I gave it to him. I gave him the money. 6 years later, the first set of this was finally made in silicon. It turned out that as time went on, we got more and more GPS satellites, and it actually went into a cigarette pack. This is the device that today is in your cell phone, that today is in your car. We tried to pretend like we knew it was going to go all that way. We really did. We talk about, what do you think anybody's going to really use this? Yeah, people who backpackers would use it, you know. But it really changed the world. It changed the world from that little simple question, what difference would it make in a guy who had an idea, which until then he couldn't get anybody interested enough to give him what turned out to be a total of $60 million to basically build the first one. It changed our whole inventory. We used to have missiles that we had to have them cross. If they had to go through over the ocean, they had to cross land in a particular place because they took a measurement of the land, and then they knew where they were.
I remember that.
This total freedom, you know. I mean, it was total, and that's where and all of this came from this guy who had on the far side guy who had this idea that once he heard this problem, he had the solution to the problem. He was just lucky, I guess, that I was there, or I was not that. I mean, I was lucky there and came back and said, "This is the problem that exists," and that was it. The whole world now. This guy, you can go back to this as being the defining moment when we knew what the problem was, and we knew, and he also had the solution to the problem. And $60 million later, we were producing them.
And Tony, as you're telling me this story, I'm thinking back to this formative stage you told us about prior to this that maybe helped wire your brain in the right way while you're at Fuller Brush, and realizing that sometimes you need to spot that problem and figure out what the solution is and sell that solution.
Absolutely. That's exactly right. And the Fuller Brush people, by the way, you know, I mean, I was just, they are the ones who, if you really want to get down to who was the guy like this guy who gave us this thing that now everybody uses, somebody in Fuller Brush. Remember, they were very successful door-to-door salesmen. They had a good product too, by the way. The product, you didn't have to be ashamed of it. It was excellent. They only had very excellent products. But somebody said, "God, what is the problem that we're having?" And came and thought about how to attack that problem. And taught people that, you know, taught it, and it worked. And so this is the same thing. Really, not much. It's at the end of the day. It's not much different. I mean, Heilmeier, he had his set of questions. If you talk to a lot of people, that people will tell you, yeah, I always thought that way, and I believe that. But Heilmeier was the first person in the right position who could do something about it, and he was enough of a person like me who said, "Hey, you're either going to do it this way, or you're not going to do it," you know. And you know what? I control the money. So it's up to you, you know. And as time went on, all the guys really started to appreciate this because they understood that this is something that at the end of the day, this is, of course, you know. I mean, this isn't of course.
Yeah.
But you know, a lot of things that are of course are only of course after you finally see them. So,
Yep. Yeah.
Anyways, sorry for the length of time, but that.
One second, Tony. I'll edit this delay out.
Okay.
All right. Now, based on that, let me return to this topic of Congress, which is reportedly now deciding to double the budget of DARPA from $3.5 billion to $7 billion a year. Based on all this, what's your opinion on that?
The same opinion when I came in and they wanted to take my 2 up to 4, 5, 8. You know, it really is the wrong thing to do. You'll end up with and look, the Congress is trying to be helpful. Okay, they are really trying to be helpful. But again, back to the old saying that if your only tool is a hammer, all problems look like nails, right? Well, the Congress, their only tool is money. When it really comes down to it, they can pass laws, but it's money. So their tool is money, and so from their viewpoint, the problem is they don't have enough money. Well, that's not the problem at all. Okay? In fact, in my mind, having that much money would get a place like DARPA, because if you didn't spend that money, then they come around and they really get on your butt, you know? Hey, how come you're not spending the money? So you end up an organization that is becoming very good at throwing the money out to people, but not really finding out what difference it would make. And so they're not getting ideas and somehow figuring out what are the really, really good ideas that I'm going to put a lot of money on, and what are the ideas that are, you know, but maybe I'll bring them along a little bit longer. Maybe something happens there. And the ideas that just are just absolutely interesting, but NIH should be doing that. Okay. You know, I mean, it's not like somebody shouldn't be doing that, but it's not a place like DARPA. DARPA is not NIH. DARPA is a place that solves problems. Okay.
Right.
Does not create knowledge, which they do. Somebody's got to create knowledge. I'm not saying that this is not a good organization, but they are. But that next step, that valley of death, is what keeps NIH from being well known for delivering anything. They can't get across the valley of death. So DARPA is the only organization I know whose whole purpose in life is that valley of death. And they could have too much money. Now, what they should have, and what, like I said, the deal made with me was that, okay, we understand, because they knew that I wasn't going to be able to spend that money, and the comptroller would be on me, the Congress would be on me, and you know, and in my case, I probably would have told them all to get bent, and then I would have been fired, you know, and so, but you know, so that didn't happen, and they didn't want that to happen, so they went along with the, you come see us if you really got something that you need money that you don't have the money for. Okay. So I think it's dangerous. In fact, I doubt it'll go through. I mean, remember, this is only one part of Congress that's just proposing that. But again, I don't want people to, I'm not saying that was again, they are trying to be helpful. Right. They are really trying to be helpful. I mean, they really are. And the only thing that way can help is give you money. And I'm saying, no, wrong, okay? Maybe there's other ways they could do by creating laws or creating something, you know, that find out what is it in DARPA that if only the law was a little bit different, you know, and they did change the laws for DARPA, by the way. We don't have to we can go and actually award somebody a contract without going out and having it go for a full-blown competition. You know, we can do single source. If we didn't have that ability, we'd be back to having these big competitions when we knew the person that we wanted to at least give them enough money to get to the point where we then would go, you know, it's sort of like, okay, now it's time he's proven that it can be done. Now we need to go and find people who can actually go from the can be done to make it done, okay? And that's a different organization, typically. You know, a small company does not do a big company's job very well. And a big company usually doesn't do a small company's job very well because, quite frankly, they're not interested in that part of the spectrum.
Yeah.
I mean, they are and they're not. You know what I mean?
Right.
So I don't know. So I think it's a danger. I don't think it'll happen. But I really do believe that throwing that kind of money is wrong. Saying that anytime you have a problem, come see us, tell us what problem you're solving, you know, and that why you think it should be done, and we will give you the problem without requiring a pint of blood from you. You know,
right?
That is the better way to do it. But in Congress, who would that be? So I think they ought to leave it alone and let the Secretary of Defense be the one who does it.
Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, you know, and then that's my impression.
Okay.
I hope that I believe it'll happen that way. But internal to the DOD, there are a lot of people who new people, there's a whole turnover now. And a lot of people really don't understand. And it's not that they're dumb or anything, but they never had anybody tell them this story. Like, hey, you know what it's about? It really is two questions. What is the problem you're trying to solve, and what difference it'll make? And if that's a big deal, then you find the money and the program. Not only just the money, but the program, and help that person to go get that, cross that valley of death. That's what the job should be.
Right.
Tony, yes, sir. Go ahead.
I just wanted to say I really appreciate all this, and I wanted to conclude with a really hard question. And I figure if I can't ask you an incredibly hard question, who am I going to ask? And that is, I would love your thoughts about cybersecurity. Any thoughts you have on this topic at all? But something that really concerns me is the fact that the U.S. invests so much in technology, advanced technology, not just government, but commercially, only to have that stolen by adversaries that want to leverage our work and creation of intellectual property for their benefit. So we have this issue of needing to protect our intellectual property. Additionally, we're building this world where everything is interconnected. So it makes it easier for the adversaries to use digital means to come right up next to us and threaten our personal privacy, or lock things down with ransomware, or steal information for their financial gain. And it's really a concerning world we live in. And I just wanted to ask your thoughts on that dynamic.
Well, it's a problem, and the problem is that we created it. We created this world with the networking and all, and we deliberately created it. That when a person wants to go get some information, he doesn't have to know how to make it happen. It happens. Okay? And then there are people who then actually get to know a little bit more. And so rather than having it be a random thing, they can kind of help steer it to a location. And so we have created a network which is open to somebody doing mischief. Now, one way to solve, and we can try to come up with all kinds of ways, but really all the people, when they're coming up with ways to protect it, what they really are doing is that they're putting up barriers, right? They're closing it down. They're not letting it be so, that you don't have to know what you're doing. It'll go figure it out for itself, type of thing. And I don't think we've gone so far now that we can't reverse this, but, and maybe what we need to do is to, maybe one way to satisfy it is to basically figure out, okay, what is it that we really want to protect? Okay, what is it that we really want to protect, and really put a wrapper around that, where you don't get in if somebody doesn't give you permission. Yeah, it makes it a little bit harder. That means you got to get permission, and that is a problem, and that takes time. It just can't happen at the speed of light. But so you do that. But then the question is, well, what is not so important that you let people get in at their will? Okay, you mean my home? What am I? My home? Well, I kind of don't want people roaming around in my home and looking at cameras and seeing what the hell is going on. So you can bring yourself to a conclusion that really what we really want to do is somehow find a way that we can go and have my home be one of those places that you just don't get in without permission. Okay. If I'm not around, or to give you permission or whatever, it's going to take longer for you to get in. It might even make my wife mad because she might forget the code word or something like that. But I mean, there's all this downside of doing this, but I don't have any other really good answer. I really don't have any good answer except to, sort of like Back to the Future. Right. Just say, okay, what is the problem? The problem is that we have made it so people don't have any way of protecting themselves, because we deliberately made it that way, and they like it that way up until the time when they get violated. Yeah.
Right.
So I don't have an answer, I guess. I don't have a good answer anyways. I don't have a good answer. I think we got to recognize that is the problem. That's the problem. And I don't have any solution. I mean, without what difference it makes being, we go back, we're less flexible,
Yeah. I think you've hit on a key point here, which is there's not going to be a solution. This is going to be with us indefinitely. It is an infinite game. We are going to continuously be under cyber attack, just like crime is going to be with us indefinitely. And law enforcement will always be an issue in the real world. In cyberspace, we need to understand there's always going to be a threat.
Well, you know what? On our cars, we're making our cars so that they're going to drive themselves. By the way, that there's no question in my mind that can be done. I mean, because I would say once again we did prove that, right? We had the contest, and people showed they could do that in traffic with other cars. The problem we got is that can somebody get in and take over your car? I don't know why not. There's nothing there stopping it. There's really nothing there stopping that from happening. And so, okay, maybe we can figure out a way to when we send out a signal that we have a code on that signal, so that when it reflects back to us, we know we're the ones that started it, so that one goes through right away, and others don't. There's ways to do it, but that means we've slowed down a little bit. We no longer can be going 100 miles an hour and having this car so flexible that it keeps itself. We now have to, maybe we can only go 60 miles an hour. There's a consequence, but somebody needs to start thinking about that.
Right.
And that's the only answer I know, is that you're going to have to put some restrictions on it. And restrictions mean you're not going to be as fast and flexible as you were before. And I think, and this is a DARPA hard problem, by the way. I mean, this is really a DARPA hard problem. Is how do I come up with a system which allows only me to get in, or people that I have explicitly allowed to get in, and yet not lose the performance that I love so much today? That's a DARPA hard problem. And I have to believe there's somebody in DARPA trying to solve that problem. I don't know who it is, but I have to believe there is somebody doing that. It's such an obvious thing that somebody had to come in. And I'm sure they got the money to go in. Well, if they have any ideas, I mean, just knowing the problem is not good. It's what are your ideas for solving this problem?
Right.
But so that's about all I have to say.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Tony, for this. It's just, I really appreciate it.
Thank you. I enjoyed it too. I really enjoyed the conversation, Bob. I enjoy you. You ask good questions. You got a good background. It's just fun. In fact, you know what? You'd be a good DARPA program manager.
Oh, thanks for saying that. I really appreciate it.
No, you would. You'd be a good DARPA program manager, or maybe an office director too. Yeah. If you want a job, I'm sure they got job openings over there.
What an honor. I think I would love to be able to help say that I shaped the future by doing that.
Well, have you gone over and talked to the current director? She's very easy to get to. I know her. She's actually a very easy person to get to. You ought to go talk to her.
Well, maybe I should, and would love to have her on the OODAcast one day. My fear is, in talking to people like that what if I waste their time? What if it's a conversation that does not add value? And that is what holds me back from those kind of discussions.
Well, hopefully somebody will listen to this conversation that we just had, and they might say, you know what? I think I got a solution. Mm-hmm. And now they kind of know where to go, right? And know how to approach them. So who knows how many people we've just gotten DARPA money for?
Right. Yeah. Okay.
Remember, not all of DARPA things are successful, but even those which fail are successful in that we know why it didn't work. And so what does DARPA do? We go working on the why it didn't work part and solve that problem. And then we'll come back to this other problem.
Cool. Well, thanks, Tony. Really appreciate it.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to this OODA Loop production. For the latest analysis on cybersecurity, technology, and global risks, please visit www.oodaloop.com.